Welcome to Squirrel, the podcast for distracted writers, hosted by Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner.
Hello, Jody.
Hey, Candy.
Welcome to Squirrel, the podcast for the distracted writer. This is our episode 19. I titled it, He Said, She Said, They Said. I did put they, because we want to be, sensitive to everyone. They said.
We be inclusive.
Yes. Because I wanted to talk about dialogue tags. Not that it's a hated subject, but this is going to be an interesting conversation.
This sounds like a subject that I would have pitched
as
a very practical one. Right? I am rubbing off on you.
Well, no, that's not exactly true.
Yes, deny it.
What happened was I was in a specific class and somebody mentioned, it was my professor, who mentioned about dialogue tags and how you absolutely should never use anything but said. And I went, what? I've never heard this before. Ever heard this before.
I keep hearing it and it makes me nuts.
I think that
silly.
I remember back. Well, let's go back to fourth grade. We're learning sentence structure and we're learning a lot more about where to put our little quotation marks and formulate those sentences for fiction. And I thought it was a rule that you had to say said at the end. And that was it. Said and then move on. But then I evolved as a person out of my 9-year-old self and learned a lot more about dialogue tags as a writer. And so I was just kind of perplexed by my professor's insistence that we should use said. I think she's wrong.
Well, what makes me crazy is that I have been in classes where you need to use said because it's invisible on the page. And if you're going to do a tag and you need to make it very clear who's speaking, the easiest way is to be said person.
I've heard that.
Makes sense. But then this same professor will turn around and give you a sheet of alternate words for said. I'm like, this seems like a mixed message here.
Yeah.
So am I supposed to use said? Am I supposed to use this list of 800 wonderful other words for said? And I'm like,
yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about. So I know we'll get to all of this. I don't want to say everything in 5 minutes. So, because I feel that there is a lot of information, and I unearthed a lot of stuff from the internet. Not that I'm super passionate about. I'm not angry. I don't call it, I wrote, this is a war, but it's not a war. It's just different. But there are some people that are absolutely against dialogue tags. Did you?
Oh, yeah. I know them.
In the writing world, this is, I would say, a heated subject. There are some people, like plotters and pantsers, there are some people that use dialogue tags, and there's some people that don't. Or there's different editors that'll say, no, you need to add this. And then there's editors that say, no, you should cut all of this out. It's just an interesting conversation.
Well, and with any writing quote unquote rule, you need to really understand what the tag is and why it's there before you can really make decisions on how you're going to creatively play with it. And so, yes, if a teacher's teaching the basic of how to tag dialogue, they're going to stick with the lowest common denominator of how to do so. That's he said, she said. But when they put their personal spin on don't use anything else, it's like, no, we have our own creative freedom. We can choose what works best for our stories, but we do need to know how it works.
Mm-hmm. I think ultimately, the ultimate goal is to make sure that we are clear on who is speaking so our readers don't get confused, right?
Absolutely.
So does it really matter if we clarify it in a different way?
I think if it stands out of the page where it seems weird when you read it, instead of saying he whispered, it's like he leaned into her ear and spoke softly so no one else could hear. Is there a place for that? Maybe. But why can't you just say he whispered or just say he said it?
Well, and another thing that was brought up during this lecture was, yes, that said was quote unquote invisible, but also that if you put like he whispered, then you're making the reader reread what they just read in a whisper, where before they had read it regularly. So they're going back and, okay, well, now we're whispering. So I also I thought that was an interesting dilemma that a writer might approach, because I like to do that. You know, if the situation calls for it whispering, how else would you approach that, where people need to whisper or that the reader needs to know that they're whispering? Do you put like...
And that's where I think there's a little bit more art in the craft, because I think if you set up a scene where it makes sense for them to be whispering, you don't have to explicitly say that they're whispering. And here I'm whispering now into the mic.
I know.
Sorry. It's power of suggestion. It's a powerful thing, people.
Yeah. Some people have put like, he whispered blah, 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 blah. And
that still feels weird to me too.
I don't know if I don't like dialogue tags at the beginning, because I feel that tells, I'm telling the reader something, and it's belittling to the reader if you're telling them exactly. Yeah,
you don't need to spoon feed the readers. Readers are smart.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was thinking. So how do you specifically tag? Can you think of how do you use said a lot?
No, I will rarely use said, because I am team action tag. I really like incorporating what the character is doing and how they're interacting with the other characters and their environment, instead of talking about how they're talking. I feel if I have to talk about how they're talking, they have to be talking differently than how they would normally be talking. And that's the only time I'm going to have a dialogue tag which actually talks about how they're talking. And otherwise, it's going to be an action tag. It's going to be, I can't stand this. He stomped around the table and slammed down the checkbook. Mm-hmm. That gives you so much more than just like, he said harshly. It's deeper. It gives you a better visual image. I just like action tags better.
Yeah, I don't know. It's wasted space if you have the moment to add action to what you're, and kind of fluff out the scene so it's a lot more visual for the reader. Go ahead, do it. I love action tags. I kind of do that too. But if I use said, but then I use a lot of commas. Well, I'm not comma crazy, everyone, but I do say, Jody said, comma, blah, 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 blah.
Amazing example. Well done.
Right. I mean, I do it's in my voice too, in my writing voice, to continue on the emotion that was created from what was spoken there. So I did, I like this author very much. His name is Maxwell Alexander Drake. He's taught many classes that I've been to, and he writes fantasy and science fiction. And he has said that he never, ever, ever uses dialogue tags, not in any form at all. Not even he shouted or, he danced or whatever, just absolutely does not use them. Would that drive you crazy?
If someone pointed it out to me and then I read the book, I'm like, oh my gosh, he didn't. They would turn into this treasure hunt trying to find the dialogue tags. But to me, in the reading experience, as long as I don't get pulled out of the story by the style of the writing, it's fine. It's when it starts, and I believe this was actually in a Kelly Barnhill, where she had this this short clippy dialogue, and it was da 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 da, he said, da da da, she said, da da da, they said, da 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 da, and it was like a whole page. And it was just figuring out who said what, and just tiny, tiny tags, but I was listening to it on audiobook. And so it was drilling into my brain every time they said he said. If I was just reading it on the page, I'd skim it. Mm-hmm. Because it would just be, this is who's talking, and that's why it's there.
You make a good point.
But when it was on audiobook, it was just like this really weird rhythm that happened because the said was repeated and repeated and repeated, and that pulled me out of the story. I'm like, that's irritating.
That's one of the reasons why you should read your stuff out loud.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. That's another episode. So,
and now, a word from our sponsor.
Something wicked this way comes. From the shadows of your mind, where nightmares dance and play, comes a collection of tales that will scare and delight. Featuring 27 stories, poems, and flash fiction pieces, all geared toward kids and inspired by the tone and feel of R.L. Stine's Goosebumps. With stories from amazing horror authors around the world, this anthology is sure to keep you on the edge of your seat. So grab a flashlight, pull up the covers, and prepare to be scared. Just be careful what you wish for. The Big Book of Things That Go Bump in the Night, coming November 14th from Timber Ghost Press, the place where you can find your next creepy, weird, and disturbing read. All right, so I pulled this from a masterclass article, so everyone can go on to masterclass. There are a lot of. Have you taken a masterclass from any of those fun writer people?
So the word masterclass is kind of a bucket term for a lot of different things. Is this a specific masterclass?
Yeah, this is masterclass trademark.
Got it.
Where
No.
James Patterson is teaching you how to write.
Of course, he's going to call it masterclass.
It's not just him. There's like a ton of things, like Steve Martin talking about comedy, teaching you that. Or there are just so many different ones. I remember Natalie Portman was doing a masterclass on how to get emotion out of your character. It was awesome.
Okay, that is cool.
No, okay.
I'm
You
ready.
need
I'll
to
jot
go.
it down.
I'll get you a subscription for your birthday. Okay, the masterclass. So I pulled this from because I thought that this was interesting. I hope I can read this. Okay. When people think of dialogue tags, the first word they probably think of is said. There are 2 points of view when it comes to using the word said in your dialogue tags. Some writers feel that using he said and she said, and we'll put in they said, as lazy writing, and that they should vary their word choice with more descriptive, specific words. Other writers feel that said should be embraced since its ordinariness, I love that word, helps to blend into the background and therefore guarantees that the reader won't be distracted by an overly elaborate word. They just used, I want to say overly elaborate word. They used ordinariness in this description. So just thought I would point that out. Masterclass. So
No, they make a good point.
mm-hmm.
I think there's a balance that needs to be reached. Now, if you really are, like I really like to embrace the action tags, there's nothing wrong with only doing action tags. Clearly, it works well for several people. If you're like, that feels weird to me, your voice doesn't have to be like their voice. Your writer voice is going to embrace what you feel is right for your balance of writing. So if you like to do a mix of having action tags and dialogue tags and saids, like, that's fine, as long as it feels right to you. Now, if your editor's like, you're doing this really dumb thing and it's driving me crazy and you need to fix it, then maybe consider making a change because your readers might be responding the same way. Like if you have a bad habit you keep falling back on. It's like, he said quietly. If you're saying that every other page, you're going to need to fix it because that's going to get repetitive in the reader's ear. And again, that's an adverb, and that's probably our next conversation.
It's getting there. We're getting there. I want to point out, this is something as I was an editor for years, and as an editor, whenever I saw said, I would often talk to, highlight this and say, give me more. What else are they doing? And some of the best writing from this author actually happened when I focused on, give me more detail here. We're going to cut this said completely out and give me more detail of what is actually happening at that moment. And I think people, as you've noticed, you said that you said was very...
when it's very repetitive, especially on an audiobook, it does kind of ping in your head.
So it's the same kind of thing when you're an editor and you're seeing said a lot of times where it might be distracting. I do often, not that I want to cut out all of the saids, but I do want to explore more of the saying. You don't have to give me a good action like yours, but I want to maybe see more of the scene. If that, I don't know, does that make sense?
Well, it gives, if you're just using a simple tag, you're losing an opportunity to be adding something a little bit more. It's the same for if you're using like, he felt sad, like that's very telling. Instead of saying, showing how he feels sad or showing the feeling of sad. A lot of times in the dialogue tag, it can be very lazy just to be like, oh, he said that. When you could be adding a tiny bit more, another clue into the world. Like, it's an opportunity.
And you said that you don't use them often, right? You said you very rarely use dialogue tags.
Very rarely. It's just, it feels like there's better ways of approaching it that I like better.
In my writing, I find it boring. I do. I don't like, not that... I just don't like
You're very dialogue-centric in your writing.
I have a lot of conversations. That's true. I like conversations.
Which means you've come up against dialogue tagging and action tagging a lot.
Oh, yeah. All the time. So I feel that it's a good opportunity for me to explore when I'm going through like my second or third rewrite, because I recognize more of where I need to fill in. So sometimes said is just a good filler when you're first writing your first draft, and then you go and you can recognize and see. I like when, again, editing, it's kind of fun to highlight how many times you say it in the document. It's just, you can see that, oh, I have this 850 times. Maybe I need to slim that down a little, just to... change it up and give you different opportunities to do something else. What are your personal feelings about adverbs?
So I feel that they've been maligned. I feel like people are like, you cannot use adverbs. So any word ending in an ly is therefore evil. And I think that is a little too subjective. Because
you said evilly.
Use it evilly. Adverbs are a part of speech. They are modifying the verb. And so sometimes they're necessary and they don't always end in ly. And so I feel like people being like, no, you can't use that. There's a reason behind that no, and that's because if you're finding yourself using a lot of these words that are helping you describe your verbs, it means your verbs aren't working hard enough. Like you could use a better verb. And so a lot of times when we find a lot of adverbs coming up in someone else's writing or coming up in our own writing, it's that we're hitting against a weak point where we need to learn how to use stronger, more evocative, more descriptive verbs. And so with me, if I'm seeing adverbs a lot, it's showing me that a writer is not embracing finding stronger verbs. For me, if I have to put an adverb in there, it's very conscientious choice because I have that little adverb
You have a gremlin
devil
on your
my shoulder.
telling you
Yeah.
that.
It's like, no, you can't do
that.
that. And so every time I choose to include one, I have to be very intentional. I'm like, actually, I do want that to emphasize this specific thing, and there isn't a better verb for it.
Mm-hmm. I kind of agree with you, honestly. I'm not going to, I don't disagree.
We agree.
We agree on something. But
We
I
both get a gold
do,
star.
unfortunately, I recognize adverbs more in other people's writing. And I that's that editor part of me now. And it ruins some of the great, delicious words and sentences because I'm distracted by an adverb. It's a terrible curse. It's like, I don't know. Once you kind of know boy, I gotta stop saying kind of, everyone. Ding, every time I say kind of.
Nope.
Jeez. But in editing, you just start to recognize flawed stuff in other people's writing, even though it's not flawed, right? I was reading Harry Potter, and yes, she has adverbs all over.
Oh, yeah.
And I became distracted by it. I hate that. I hate it when those rules stick in my head and distract me. So what do you think? I wanted to point out this, though, because I found it was a little bothering to me when things are in present tense. When it's say and not said. I bring this up because I remember reading Hunger Games, which is all in present tense, which actually I don't disagree with present tense. I think it's pretty cool. And people that there's a lot of books right now that is their go-to way to write is in present tense. They're like V.E. Schwab only writes in present tense.
It makes it very immediate. It's like it's happening now.
Yeah, the anxiety is there. So it's a great trick, honestly. When I was reading,
I think it's hard to do.
You have to switch that, switch in your brain to change how everything that you just thought needs to be, so that it's happening now instead of in the past with a said, where the anxiety is, I don't know what's going to happen here with this when they use say. Either does anybody else in the story, because it isn't in past tense. Right?
Well, you don't have the surety of they know what's going on either.
Yeah.
Which can either be a perk or an annoyance. When done well, it's really nice. Like, I think it's cool.
Yeah.
When done poorly, or if it's inconsistent, it's just like, stop.
Right.
That's annoying.
In Hunger Games, coming back to that one, so Hunger Games from Suzanne Collins, I did not know what to expect when I saw all these says everywhere. Katniss says. It was hard for me to get into the book because of this. I had to just rewire thinking and into a present tense mindset. It's easier for me now because it's more prevalent now in writing. But at that time, it wasn't. It was new for me, and it was jarring. I didn't like seeing that. But like in V.E. Schwab's writing, where she's writing in present tense, she doesn't use says a lot. She doesn't even bring up dialogue tags a lot.
No.
It's just straight story. She doesn't never. I mean, she might avoid dialogue tags completely. I'm not really sure. I think she doesn't, but I can't really verify that. But it's not distracting at all because I never notice it. But I did notice it.
And that's where a skilled writer, like, they can use these cool techniques to make things feel conflict-driven and immediate and really just happening and popping off the page. And if they're if they're good at it, it's seamless and it doesn't pop you in the face. And it could just be the style of writing jives more with what you identify as I like this, as opposed to being clubbed over the head with, she says, I say, because that does feel weird coming across it. It feels like you're reading something that an elementary school kid has written, like when they're writing their stories, because that's what they're familiar with. But it feels almost juvenile when it's not handled correctly. And I think it does, it pulls you out of the story when you're like, I no.
Well, okay. Where do you see ways of good dialogue tags in your writing?
So with every sentence in a story, it needs to add something. And dialogue tags are no different, because a good dialogue tag will add to the story without drawing attention to itself. Like cut and dry right there. When it gets really repetitive, when it falls into the same patterns, anything that draws the reader's nose away from the story, that's what you want to be trying to avoid. And so like your example with using a first person POV, if seeing I say is jarring, like we should use action tags instead to avoid that, because that does pull a lot of people out of the story.
I love that advice. In my voice, I do use said when I need to, but I mostly use that space instead for direction, as we kind of clarified. But I like to give my characters something to do often, and it might be distracting to give them too much to do, maybe too much blocking in the story.
Well, and it slows the pacing down if you do too much.
Yeah. So you just have
too.
to be where and I also instruct authors that I have edited for, as I said, to be careful with using dialogue tags and just seeing if it's actually necessary. If it's not necessary, let's just cut it. It's okay. And I mean, sometimes you don't even need to clarify that that's the person that's speaking. You don't even need it. So if it's a 2-person scene, who cares about the dialogue tag? As long as you have it formatted correctly, we're good. So that's a good place to put in your action and your scene description and all that good stuff. So yeah, I think this has been fun. I'm glad that we had this discussion. What I really wanted to mention is just make sure that it's okay to not use said. Don't listen to your professor. If you want to use said, though, it's okay too, right?
And if you're doing NaNoWriMo right now, adding action tags is an amazing way of adding a whole lot more words. Because he said is 2 words.
And that doubles
any
every time.
Any action tag is going to be a lot longer.
And then it's a place marker for you to fill in the details of what's actually happening. So you can highlight all of those he says and she says, and do something else. That's brilliant, Jody.
It's sneaky, and I love it.
That is fun. That is really good. All right. So here we go. What are we talking about next time?
Next episode is going to be all about writing contests.
Yay, writing
there
contests.
is controversy involved.
Really?
There is a sneaky underbelly of the writing contest world that I think readers and writers need to know about.
Oh, okay. Yeah. This is one of the first episode ideas that we had. So it's been simmering for a while. So I'm glad that we get a chance to talk about it. So, yeah, I'm excited for this discussion.
All right. Thank you for joining us today on Squirrel. Remember, we do have a Patreon. We'd love to see you coming over and getting those goodies there. If you found anything in this episode that you particularly loved and you think someone else, perhaps a writer friend in your life, might love it too, send it their way. Let's share the love.
I love it. Sharing the love.
Share the love. Until next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Squirrel Podcast for the Distracted Writer with Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner. This episode was recorded at the Farmhouse Recording Studio. Please like and subscribe to our podcast for updates and new episodes, and find more information at our website, squirrelpodcast.com. Stay distracted, everyone. I have that tinky tinky music in my head now.
Oh,
so
goody.
Cute. Tinky 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 tinky.
I'm pushing the button.